Excellent. So while Peter and David are getting everything all good to go at their end, I'm going to do a wave because that's what we do when we do a video conference. I'll just do an intro for our two presenters for this session. So Peter is the manager of digital library services at Bond University, with a special interest in library technology and systems, as well as project management, social media, and digital library services. Peter's contribution spans many areas, but of relevance for today's session has been her recent contributions to the Working Group for Indigenisation of the Library. David has 18 years of experience in the IT sector and moved into the library at the University of Newcastle in 2020 as the Manager Digital Library Experience. He has a passion for automation, scripting, and more recently in the emerging fields around AI. I'm now going to mute myself, and Peter and David, I'll leave it with you to take over.
Thank you very much, Sean. So to start off, first, Bond University acknowledges the Kombumerri people, the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which the university stands. We pay our respect to elders past, present and emerging, and I thank them for their love and care of the land and the seas and for their willingness to share that with us. And I extend that to any First Nations people joining us today from wherever they may be.
And the University of Newcastle acknowledges the traditional custodians of the lands within our footprint areas, the Awabakal, Darkinjung, Biripi, Worimi, Wonnarua and Eora nations. We also pay respect to the wisdom of the elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to extend this acknowledgement and pay my respects to the Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander people here today. I recognise the First Nation sovereignty was never ceded. This continent always was and always will be Aboriginal land.
Have to remove our faces from in front of my notes. There we go. Okay, libraries and archives manage resources from different times and cultures to make available the scholarly and historical record. As a result, our collections contain resources that members of our community might find harmful or offensive. Indeed, the way they were catalogued when they first entered our collections may also be using harmful terminology. But our catalogue records play a crucial role in connecting patrons with relevant materials. The metadata comes from various sources, including publishers, international, national, and shared library catalogues, as well as our own local records. Retaining original descriptions ensures that attitudes and viewpoints from the past are not erased, but we can endeavour to provide historical context with content advice or notes to mitigate the impact of offensive or harmful language and give users the choice of whether to engage with those resources or not. In this session, David and I will tell you how we are using the Trove API to provide cultural sensitivity indicators in Primo VE with two different approaches. The Trove application programming interface allows developers and librarians to formulate complex search queries. It returns the results in a machine-readable format, XML, or extensible markup language, including the usual catalogue record data, contributing institutions, and user-added tags even. Its purpose is to support development of applications or interfaces integrating Trove data. Indeed, the Trove Alma Cloud app uses this API. Its role in the work we are presenting is that it has two key pieces of data denoting that a title contains material that is culturally sensitive for Australian Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And the other is that it is by or about First Australians.
So this slide shows a quick view of what the Trove API looks like if you haven't had a look already. At the top, I've added some links to the Trove API as well as the API documentation. And you can apply for access through this second link. It only takes about half an hour to get your access. But there's so many options to choose from. And when looking at the API, such as the general search, works, people and organizations and newspapers, etc. When you're ready to start using the API, you need to think about what you're really looking for, what you're trying to do and what information you want returned. You might have to use one piece of information which is then used to capture another piece of information, and then to do a lookup with that information in another section, such as using the general search to capture the work ID, and then the work ID to look at the people and organizations. So your search could really be multi-layered. Just remember though, you need to have some sort of reference, like the title, the published date, or some other flag which you can use in the Trove API to capture other information. Using the title and published date, you will see a return of multiple records for this one book. This is sorted by relevancy. This relevancy score has a score of 1,224, which is actually quite high. The next record below this was 774. And you can see the top arrow was the title, the middle arrow was the relevancy score, and the bottom arrow shows those two flags that Peter mentioned, the culturally sensitive and the first Australian. But the first Australian author, we thought was actually the author, but it was a lot more than, as Peter said. It didn't actually mean what we thought. So I reached out to Trove, and their response was, in the Trove API, the culturally sensitive flag is used to indicate materials that may contain content that is considered sensitive or offensive to certain cultural groups, particularly Indigenous Australians, which is great. This is what we wanted. This flag often is applied to historical documents, images, or other media that include depictions or descriptions that are outdated, discriminatory, or inappropriate by modern standards. As part of the Trove redesign, a new First Australians indicator was added on the search results, works and people organisation records that have been related to First Australians. So just have to be aware that it's about the works and people organisations rather than the First Australian author. The rules for applying First Australian indicators are slightly different for works versus people and organisation records. A work will have a First Australian indicator applied if there is a relevant term in the MARC or DC record, e.g. Indigenous and Australia, or if an Auslang language code is present. A people and organisation record will have the First Australians indicator applied if an Auslang language code is present in the local description element, or there is a relevant term in the key fields of the MARC or DC record.
It's there, and we know that it's there for us to use. And so how might we use it in Alma and Primo? So we want to use it in our bibliographic records, or even potentially in holdings records. We might want to use it in our day-to-day cataloguing, so one item at a time. We might want to do a batch job with norm rules and apply them to a batch of records, or we might want real-time API updates to happen. And then once we have the data in Alma, we then think about, well, how are we going to display that and use it in Primo so that our users can see and interact with it. So I'm going to talk about our approach at Bond University. The library team has been a long-time supporter of the Indigenous Literacy Foundation, running book swaps, lucky prize draws, and hosting events celebrating Indigenous voices. We've been inspired by and learning from our colleagues in the QLOC Indigenous Strategy Community of Practice and the work of others, such as Stacey Van Grol's presentation at Igaloo last year. Bond has the largest private collection of Australian Indigenous art on public display in Australia. If you're in our area, do please look up the Corrigan Walk webpage. We felt that we wanted to review where we were at and formalise our efforts towards reconciliation a bit more. The library established a working group in 2023 to review our operations, services and collections under the lens of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Library Information Research Network protocols. I'll refer to that as ATSI-Learn moving forward. This group consults with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander members of the Bond community, both staff and students. Several recommendations have been made, and this work on cultural sensitivity indicators is one of them. Our first goal for this initiative was to make a start that we can build on with a flexible configuration that supports other kinds of content advice notes in line with our commitment to inclusion. So not necessarily only First Australians, but perhaps other bondies too. Okay, some of my slides have quite a bit of text on them, so it's there for your future reference. Although we are interested in the First Australian flag in Trove, I'm not going to talk about that today, except to say it could be used to identify records that we should be putting into one of our featured collections. So I'm going to focus just on the cultural sensitivity flag. Our approach has been to use that data as a kickstarter to update existing records in our collection. And because we're doing this as a batch without inspecting every item, we needed a note that would be broadly applicable and consulted with our community on this, along with the rest of the user experience design. So first of all, in terms of getting the data, we wanted to search Trove for our National Union catalogue or NUC symbol, so Coupe, plus the flag for cultural sensitivity. So we just wanted to identify what have we got that Trove has flagged. We then ran the query at the bottom there in a browser. And because we were only looking at about 2,000 records, we decided it was easier just to run it using the next start value multiple times until we had retrieved all of those records. The XML was then taken and put into Excel to review it and to extract bonds OAI PMH identifiers to isolate our MMS IDs in Alma. So if you're contributing holdings to Trove via the daily update, OAI PMH, then your identifiers appear in the Trove output. Once we had the MMS IDs isolated, we used that to create a set in Alma, and that gave our team the opportunity to validate the set, that there wasn't anything unexpected in there, and the set and how many titles it contained. We then had to decide where we were going to put the note, and we settled on the 520 tag with a first indicator equals 4, and this denotes that it's for a content warning. Our note is an advisory note. It makes no mention of restricted access or what users can or can't do with the content, so there is no terms of use in it. Those types of notes properly belong in other fields, and decisions can be made about how to display or use those fields separately. For community zone records, we cannot use the 520, but for future work, we are considering the use of a local extension in a suitable field and incorporating them into the same Primo local field. I'll talk more about how we updated the records, but the next step for us was to figure out how it should work in Primo. Since those changes would need the records to be re-indexed and updating them would trigger that, I left the batch update until last. In the brief results, we decided to show a yellow dot, there it is there, for items in specific collections. So these are the ones in our collection discovery area. In the future, I'd like to consider what other types of triggers would help us show which records in CDI, for example, might be by or about First Australians through the presence of language codes or key phrases in the topics. For the content advice note, we display a flag icon, and the dot and the icon are using font Awesome, with a tooltip advising to view the full record for details. We do not show the full note in the brief results. In the facets, over here, we offer searchers the opportunity to filter, to show or exclude results with content advice categories. In the full record, we display the content note twice. So you can see it here, once at the top with styling to highlight it, and once again in the details area where it sits alongside other types of content metadata, such as the table of contents. The yellow dot and flag indicators are also visible. They are in line with Primo labels for Leganto lists, open access indicator, and others. And we include a link just at the end of the note, which goes to a web page about the library's commitment to inclusion. And that web page has more information on how we handle culturally sensitive materials and how users can report problem records to us. Okay, so we figured out what we wanted and now how to make it actually do that. So we added, because we wanted to use facets, we had to make sure it was a search and facet field. So that was the first step in local fields using search and facet normalization rules table, and we called it content advice. We then had to configure that in the manage display and local fields. And this is where we have normalization rules that make use of that first indicator equal 4, since we do not want to modify other types of 520 notes. For the display purposes, the rules append some class IDs and the web page link to the wording in the 520 field. So that link is not in the bibliographic record, it's just being created through this normalization. For the search and facet rules, we check for the appearance of strings in the 520 note to assign content advice categories. Because we want this local field to handle a 520 with first indicator 4, we also needed to make sure that the content warning notes are not displayed via the out-of-the-box description field, or else it would appear twice. So this too was modified in the manage display and local fields to exclude those with first indicator equals 4. Then we modified the view to make use of the new local field. We added it to the local field to the description for brief records, using a non-breaking space as the delimiter. And this configuration is also used in the full record display at the top of the page. The note does display in the full records, but not in the brief results. And we'll get to that in a moment. We added it to the details section of the full record, and we added the new facet to the brief results tab. Okay, the customization package is where my colleague Jessie Donaghy crafted the CSS and JavaScript to make it look right and to show the appropriate tooltips. So the JavaScript does the work of making the two visual indicators appear. So the red flag if it's a content advice note, and the yellow dot if the title is one of our Indigenous Resources Collections titles. The CSS hides the content advice note in the brief results, but styles it in the full record view. And it applies style tooltips to the indicators as well. After checking with some sample records that we manually updated, we wanted to make sure the Primo configuration changes worked as expected, and then we were ready to do our batch job. And to prepare for that, a normalization rule had to be created in the metadata editor. So this rule adds a 520 with an indicator, first indicator 4, into the bibliographic record. So it does a little check. The first bit there, it's looking at the 001 tag for our bond unique institution identifier in it. And I've got that there as a way to help us work out what we're going to do with those community zone records down the track. It looks to see if there's already a note like that in the record, and if there is, it doesn't create it. Otherwise, it will go ahead and put into the 520 note the text that you can see here on the screen. Having successfully, it was then added to a process in resource configuration. The process has a mark drool task, and the new normalization rule is the tasks parameter. Having successfully tested it in the metadata editor on several records, we then exported the full set as a backup, just in case. And then we ran the mark normalization job, selecting our new process on the set we had identified using the Trove data. So we are now also capturing 520 notes in the Alma titles analytics area to help us review and plan other records for update. I won't go into detail about our new web page, but it's here for your future reference. And this is essentially where that link goes to. So David will now discuss the approach taken at the University of Newcastle Library.
Thanks, Peter. A few months ago, probably about 6 months ago, our library staff were tasked with looking at each of our Indigenous collections items one at a time and looking them up to see if they were authored or illustrated by First Australians and if they were deemed culturally sensitive. This was over 1,500 items in our collection, lots of manual work and lots of spreadsheets, lots of internet searches. Each item would take about 10, 15 minutes. And in a best case scenario, about 250 hours was needed to do this. And it works out about 7 weeks. So I was asked if there was anything I could do to assist. And I knew that the Trove had their API, and it flagged culturally sensitive and First Australian. But as you know, the First Australian is not the Indigenous or the field we're actually looking for. So let's just concentrate on the culturally sensitive part. So Bond and Stacey did some really amazing work, and I thought I could do something like this. But our first iteration was really bad. You can see that top image just said culturally sensitivity warning, Indigenous author. And I just put that in there manually to see what it looks like. But then I saw Stacey's work, and I chatted to Peter and said, no, we can do this better. We can build on the shoulders of giants. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We were just looking at making those changes to the holding records as well. As I read somewhere, this was the only thing that we could do to have them visible as a note. And we could not add it to the item records. It was what I was told at some point, which was incorrect. Then, like I said, we talked to Bond, and this was a game changer. We knew that using their method, we could automate this. So let's talk about the automation and how we did it. So knowing the capabilities of these systems help. Most of our libraries have a technical person. If you feel that you may be able to automate something or want to automate something, go and ask them, go and talk to them. What's on your wish list? I want to do X. Or subscribe to the ANZREG lists and talk to other libraries. And even ask ChatGPT what is possible. So I was handed 20 barcodes. I pulled out one of these records and did the work manually to see what it looks like, enabling the field visibility, as Peter mentioned. And then I looked at Trove and how they structured their API. It was very confusing to start. And I did some testing in their demo environment, and the extract, like I said, was very confusing. So I just picked up the entire extract, handed it to ChatGPT and said, can you just make sense of this? I'm looking for these fields. It found what I was looking for, and it did it very quickly. The cultural sensitive and the First Australian. But I need to provide, if I want to do this in real life, I need to provide Trove with the publish date and the title. And they were the two things that I needed to provide. So back to Alma and to ChatGPT. Hey, ChatGPT, could you write me an API script to extract these details from a hard-coded barcode? And it did it. And it was great. So set that aside, back to ChatGPT, and can you work through a series of barcodes on a spreadsheet and create a new CSV file with the results? Yep, that worked. So, okay, getting really excited here. Sign up for the Trove API. Took about 20 minutes, half an hour, and I've got my API key. I went back to ChatGPT and said, can you write a script with hard-coded publish date and title to extract the flags I need in the Trove API? Yep, sure, it worked. So I pointed ChatGPT to the original CSV it built for me with the details of the record, and to run through these, removing the hard-coded details, of course, and display it on the screen. And sure enough, it worked. So I asked ChatGPT to put this all together and now add these results from Trove to the CSV. And again, it worked. Now, when I say it worked, there was a lot of backwards and forwards with ChatGPT. It wasn't instant. It was, I got this error, and had to give it some examples. But eventually, now I have a CSV which has all the details that I need. So doing all that work, I ended up with this CSV up the top, which looked something like this. It has the original barcode on the left, the Alma details, which is the title and the publication date and the MMS ID, the Trove lookup details, and then also tells me in the existing 925A field what you can see from this example. So you can see in that bottom section. So from here, we now know that the 925A field is empty, or it already has some content in it. And yes, in my image, it says 852Z. Ignore that. It's meant to be 925. So you had to know if there was something already in there. And the second image, you can see that once we ran the second script, that it let us know what actually needed an update or not. So you can see in there, the update status is no update needed, no update needed, but the last one says the update updated successfully, but it was meant to say update required. We'll get to that in a second. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a demo. So I'll just get Peter to stop sharing, and I will share my screen. And I will show you just about a real-time example. So everyone can see this screen, which has the barcodes on it. Peter, can you see that? All right, so I'm just going to hit play, and I'm just going to pause in a couple of places. So this doesn't need to be the 7 or 8 barcodes that I've got here. You could have hundreds, you could have 2, you could have 3. So I was provided with these barcodes. And if we have a look at the record that I'm going to change, we can see that the 925 field doesn't exist. And in the search results, and we can see here, this record here doesn't show anything. And in the actual item, there is nothing to be seen here as well. So ran the script. It's just a Python script. And you can see here, it's going to go off to the Alma API and get the publish date just from the barcode, the publish date and the title. And it's going to send that to Trove. And this was the only time I sped things up a little bit. It's not much. It's only like 2 or 3 times speed. You can see here, once it finishes, you can see here right at the bottom, we've got these 2 flags, Trove Culturally Sensitive and Trove First Australian, and they've both got a Y on this result. The other ones had a cultural sensitive is no info, and no info, I presume that it's not culturally sensitive. So that wrote to the output CSV, which I showed earlier in the slides. And this is what it looks like straight after being written to. So we can see all the publication date, the title, the MMS ID. Trove came back and said, you know, this is what, from the relevancy, what matches, and the flags that we can see here as well. And it's also determined that there's no content in the subfield A95A. So let's run the actual script to write back to Alma now. And it's just going to look at that CSV and then make the changes to write culturally sensitive in the 925 field. So once that's done, that was pretty quick, is we refresh. And we can see here that the 925 field actually has something in the metadata record. And if we refresh the search, we now have the cultural advice. And in the item record, we have the cultural advice as well. So there was a lot of demonstrating this, but if you had a spreadsheet with 1,000 barcodes, you could let this run, and in the morning, it'll have all your cultural advice ready to go. And I did stop it. I made it into 2 scripts, so you could do that check before sending it to Alma to make those changes. And it allows you to go back in those items where you see that it has no info or it was erroring, that you can go back and check those ones manually. But it's better than checking the 1,500 ones all manually. So I'll just stop my sharing and send it back to Peter.
Right, so I think
Yep.
this is still you?
Still me, yep. So automation is a real thing, and it makes work very, very easy for us. So it gives us consistency and accuracy. Automation reduces human error and ensures that tasks such as cataloging, indexing, and metadata updates are performed consistently and accurately every time. Efficiency and time savings. Automated systems can process large volumes of data at speeds far exceeding manual capabilities, freeing up library staff to focus on more complex and customer-focused tasks. Scalability. Automation can handle increasing amounts of work without the need for proportionate increases in staff. This scalability makes it easier to manage large-scale cataloging projects or sudden influxes of new materials. Enhanced data integration. Automation tools can seamlessly integrate with multiple databases and APIs like Alma and Trove, ensuring that library catalogues are up to date and comprehensive, which includes maintaining culturally sensitive information. And the trust through transparency and control. By setting clear parameters and rules, automation provides a transparent process that librarians can monitor and control, thereby building trust over time through consistent and predictable outcomes.
Okay, so wish lists in the future. Certainly, as I mentioned before at Bond, I'm very interested in looking at our community zone records and also, of course, you know, the larger collection of records that are in CDI that we might be displaying. We've also been thinking about our existing holdings that at some point may be flagged in Trove in the future, and how do we retrospectively find them and then look back to the data to see if we need to update them as well. And also, I've been thinking about how we might want to incorporate that data into Leganto citations. So at the moment, they're not, when Leganto links to something that's in Alma, it's not bringing back that 520 note. So it's not visible to our students. So there's all sorts of things that we'd like to look at moving forward.
One of our wish list items, my wish list item, is improving that script for automation. There's so many more ideas to improve that script and to make it better and make it more automated and provide feedback for things that it didn't find. So I'd love to be able to have the time to sit there and do it more and more.
On the community advocacy front, I think it's really important that libraries, of course, continue to engage with their Indigenous staff and students, and certainly their local community as well. In the library, our working group was established last year. We've been looking at the ATSI protocols and seeing what have we already done and how could we stretch ourselves, and that constant going back to our Indigenous staff and students to check in with them as to how we're proceeding and are we on the right track here has been really important. With this particular piece of work, we created a screencast from Sandbox and shared that to the community for feedback with a whole heap of information as well, which of course was too much to take in, but we gave that to them via email and then said, we know this is a lot, we're happy to meet with you and discuss it. But all of the feedback was positive and no one wanted to meet with us prior to deployment. So we were able to go ahead and do that prior to Reconciliation Week, which was really nice.
Some of the collaboration, when I mentioned earlier about having a chat to Peter and looking at the stuff that Stacey's doing in this space as well, I think it's really important that we highlight the importance of ongoing collaboration between libraries, including not just libraries, but Trove and our users as well, such as the Indigenous community. The more that we're able to share our ideas and try and help each other, the better that our whole environments are going to be. Also, one of the ideas or the concepts I had when I wrote the script was to try and look at other areas that have potentially that authorship, the Indigenous author flag. And one of those websites I found was Auslit Blackwords, which was great. But you had to manually put in the the title and the author and so forth, which made it a bit more time consuming, and I couldn't automate that. So I reached out to them, and I'm actually having a discussion with them this week, at the end of this week, to to discuss how they're going to build an API for us to be able to do some more automation as well.
I want to mention in terms of collaboration is another plug to see if anyone else is out there who would be interested in collaborating on the Alma Trove search cloud app, because I really see that it's already, searching Trove, and I see that as something that plugs into Alma and would be a great help if it also could show the cultural sensitivity and First Australians flag right there in Alma as we're working on a particular work or a list of titles. We could do a search for keywords and find records that may need our attention. So that's still on another thing on my wish list as well. Okay, we're happy to take some questions. I will say that there is a repository on GitHub, which I've provided all of the normalization rules and instructions and all the bits and pieces that I've used at Bond, as that's available for you there. And David has contributed the scripts that they're using at the University of Newcastle as well. So that's all there for you to use and test and see how it all works out for you if you want to do it.
I think there's a question there for you, Peta.
Oh,
have you done anything via normalization rules to update terms like Aborigines to correct spelling, or do you leave these in place with a warning?
Let me just scroll through these. No, we haven't done that yet, but that is another possible idea that should be pretty doable. I can't put blind faith in efficacy. Oops, is that an AI question?
That is an AI question.
Yeah.
The faith in the ChatGPT part in the generative AI was only to help me build the script. There was no lookup used with ChatGPT to look at the actual cultural sensitivity, and that information came directly from Trove. So there was nothing there that ChatGPT did to signify that this was a culturally sensitive item. Although I do have some ideas and I've been doing some testing with it, but you're exactly right, it does hallucinate. So I don't trust that myself, but I do trust the information that's coming from Trove. And yeah, what safeguards do you have on returning the accuracy of the data it's returning? The safeguard is in Trove. And we know that the script works. Like I said, it's the fact that it is very transparent and you're getting the information straight from that transparency in Trove. Were there any considerations or processes needed as part of the pushing the data? You mentioned being fed into ChatGPT as part of the process. Yeah, as I said, ChatGPT did not make the decision for me whether it is culturally sensitive. It just helped me write that script. I do not know how to write Python script, and it helped me just to be able to do that. And I tested and I tested and I tested. Yeah, so it was very clear for me to, when I did the testing with ChatGPT, to pull out that culturally sensitive and try to get it to determine it, that it wasn't going to work. And I had to find a true source of truth. I'll let you answer this next one, Peta. How long did the project take?
How long did the project take? Well, it took a little while. Some of that was getting validation, I guess, that we were on the right track, not just with our Indigenous staff and students who collaborate with us, but with our information resources team who do the cataloguing and acquisitions. And, are we putting this in the right note? Is this going to work? Are you happy with the set that we've created? Does it look accurate? All of those sorts of things. So there was a lot of checking backwards and forwards, consulting within our working group as well. We had conversations about should we be using an icon or not, and in the end it was let's just go with the yellow dot, and everyone was happy with that part of it. I think in terms of the biggest challenge, though, for me personally, was getting my head around all the different types of normalization rules that had to be done, how the local fields were going to work, and oh yes, and also once I had the mark ones right, I also had to do a little bit for we have a few Dublin core records as well. So it was, you know, quite a bit of learning, and I think that's why I was motivated to share that, so that if anyone else is interested in doing this too, you maybe not be starting completely from scratch. So hopefully this is a bit of a help if you're on this path as well.
And I think from my point of view, we're not at the point of putting this into production at all. We still haven't kicked off that project. My case study was just a proof of concept. But I think it works, and I think it's quite viable to be able to, at one point or at some point, point this to our whole entire Alma list of barcodes and say, run it over the weekend and come back on Monday, and I should have all these flags. And we don't need to use it in the automation piece. We don't need to just do it for culturally sensitive. We could do it for so many more things that we want to put in there.
Now, just comment, Catherine's posted about this being an interesting and useful presentation and good incentive. Well, thank you, Catherine. And I will say that we had really positive feedback from our community. We shared it on the intranet. We shared it with the people we were consulting with as well. And we've had, we actually have got noticed in the rest of the universities as doing some good work towards reconciliation. So yeah, definitely had positive feedback.